Hello, Eleanor Beaton here, and welcome back to another episode of the Woman Owned podcast. Women's entrepreneurship and women's labor continue to be one of the world's grossly mispriced assets going. What I mean by that is the OECD found that by addressing structural and legal barriers to women's full participation in entrepreneurship and employment, the world would see a global 20% lift in GDP. And to put that in context, a global 20% lift in GDP is a civilization scale shift. This is the kind of shift that we saw in World War II, post-World War II economic reconstruction. It is major. In the US alone, if we could get women-led businesses generating revenue on par with businesses led by men, we would see a $10.2 trillion lift in annual economic activity. And to put this into context, there are only two economies globally that have economies bigger than 10.2 trillion, and that is the United States and China. So we are talking about women's employment and women's entrepreneurship, not as a niche issue, but as a major macroeconomic lever that is currently grossly underpriced and undervalued. Now, there are two major forces happening right now. The first is that the structural barriers that women have faced for decades, and I'm talking about things like caregiving, I'm talking about things like infrastructure, the broken rung bias, all of these things that women have been navigating for a long time have not really moved. And meanwhile, AI is rewriting the workforce and rewriting the labor force at a speed we have not seen. And the degree to which AI is rewriting the workforce will ultimately determine who participates in the next generation, the next economy, and who gets left behind. 87% of roles that are just most disrupted by AI are predominantly held by women. This is both the collision and it's also the path forward. Enter the W.I.N Challenge. This is a $60 million initiative from Aspen Digital and Pivotal. This is Melinda French Gates' organization, which is funding up to 24 organizations who are building scalable solutions across three pillars: workplace culture, the AI economy, and narrative change. The hundreds of applications have come in from every state. This is one of the most serious institutional bets being made for women in this moment. And I am incredibly honored to have been selected as a judge for the W.I.N Challenge this year. And I really wanted to welcome today's guest onto the episode to talk about the larger factors shaping women in work and how the W.I.N Challenge is rising to meet the moment. Clare Bresnahan English leads the challenge. In this conversation, we're covering what made the W.I.N Challenge necessary now. What is the applicant pool revealing? Where is innovation actually coming from? And we're going to talk about why so many of the strongest solutions are actually clustered around things like care infrastructure and the quote-unquote broken rung. We'll also tackle the bigger question underneath it all, which is whether this is a Gilded Age moment for women and whether women are positioned to become titans of the AI economy if they claim it. This is a powerful conversation that really speaks to some of the major factors shifting the economy of the future. I can't wait to share it with you. My question is, what gap did you and the W.I.N Challenge team see in the field that ultimately made the W.I.N Challenge feel necessary now?
Eleanor, thank you for having me on to talk about the W.I.N Challenge, to talk about this incredible applicant pool. The need goes back, years, in the sense that the W.I.N Challenge is an initiative of Aspen Digital, a program of the Aspen Institute that is partnering with Pivotal, Melinda French Gates' organization, looking at the barriers that women have faced for too long in the workplace, giving responsibilities, the broken run of promotion rates from the very beginning of a first promotion to the C-suite, violence and harassment, bias, as well as knowing that workplaces are transforming at the speed of light right now because of the AI boom and AI economy. And so there is truly this sense of where the workplace is changing at a rapid pace, that we need to really look at how the persistent, stubborn barriers that women have faced for so long in their career across any sector, across any phase of your working years, coupled then now with the impact and the potential of AI, really meant that there was this moment of where there needed to be just an infusion of resources into the innovators who are looking at this moment, not accepting the status quo, not accepting that this isn't a moment where women can really lead and shape a workforce transformation that's going to last decades and generations to come. This is the moment to really lead, to experiment, to be bold in our innovations. And we know that that takes resources. So the WIN Challenge is this opportunity, and as a partnership between the Aspen Institute and Pivotal, to seek the bold innovations across the US that are looking at how do we address the impact of AI? How do we look at how we change workplace culture and practices? And then also, how do we look at narrative change, knowing that if we change policies and practices, if we look at how AI, both mitigating the bias and also looking at the potential of what happens when tech is built for us by us, there's a real opportunity here, but also it needs to be coupled with narrative change, understanding that there is so much power there in terms of being able to relook at how we're redefining success, how we're looking at who's a leader, how we're looking at really right now, so much of the conversation around women in leadership, women in business has become stale. It
Mm.
doesn't actually reflect the moment of what most, at least for our challenge, most American women and families are facing right now. So this was just a moment where we needed to be able to really bolster up the innovators and the change makers. And we're just so excited at the response that we've gotten, the solutions that have been coming in. And it's a moment where, oh gosh, even in the face of all the different challenges right now that women are facing at work and families are facing in America right now, there's this moment of, wow, there's so many incredible leaders doing the work on the ground, and they're just ready to be scaled.
You mentioned the power of narrative. And from my perspective, my thesis and the thesis of Safi is really that women entrepreneurs, and of course that's our area of focus, are under architected. But narrative continues to be incredibly important. And we've discussed this before, this idea that there is sometimes a narrative of women's economic empowerment, whether that's through the lens of entrepreneurship, whether that's through the lens of employment, whether that's through the lens of social initiatives. This idea that women's economic empowerment or economic advancement is a niche issue, or worse, horrible horrors that women entrepreneurs may be a niche market. And when you look, what my take on this is that one of the world's greatest market failures is women's entrepreneurship and the women's labor force, in the sense that we know the OECD has research that points out if we were to address structural barriers and legal barriers for women in entrepreneurship and employment, that would yield a 20% lift in global GDP, which is a civilization era lift. If women-led businesses in the United States were to generate revenue on par with their male-owned counterparts, it would be a $10.2 trillion lift in economic activity. There are only two countries who generate more than $10.2 trillion in economic activity per year, which is the United States and China. Women are a massive macroeconomic lever that have been grossly mispriced by the market. It's huge market failure. So it's quite refreshing to see when you have organizations like the Aspen Institute, like Pivotal, that are correcting that 60 million at a time, to invest in these solutions.
You know, you nailed it on the head of where the very framing of it, of how so often thinking of women entrepreneurs, women in leadership, women in business, women in XYZ as niche, is that very structure, the very mental perspective, mental makeup of that means that we're putting it as a sidebar, and to really understand that women have for decades in different ways been economic drivers. Whether you can look at the sense, though, that now it's really culminated into this point of where there's such a zero sum assumption right now. This is part of what the solutions and the narrative pillar that we looked for was, how are we breaking down the zero sum assumption that when women advance, others don't advance as well? When actually so much of the research, the lived experience, you have both the research and the anecdotal examples of how when women advance as business leaders, when women advance within their own career trajectories, you get this multiplier effect where it impacts families, impacts communities, it impacts the overall communities of our economy. And it's the sense of where, when are we going to actually wake up to the power of this? Is almost feels like for me, and I'm sure for you, Eleanor, and many of the women listening, a duh moment. We have so many conversations happening around affordability. We're having really important conversations around the cost of caregiving. And there comes a moment of when are we going to wake up and understand that by unleashing the economic power of women's leadership in business can be an incredible lever and power for change. It's just this moment where I can't help and think of, when are we going to wake up? And so part of what I'm really excited is there's a lot of great narrative change solutions coming in at looking at how do you really tell the story of that multiplier effect? How do you look at the and be able to connect the dots and to make this a sense of where ultimately, truly, when women are succeeding, everyone wins? I think what's really exciting within the Win Challenge is we've got this incredible council of advisors, including entrepreneurs, including Fortune 500 CEOs, and one who I've known for a long time in my career, Sarah LaFleur, the co-founder of M.M.LaFleur, the brand that looks at how do we make sure our wardrobes, of course, are armoring us up for the day, but also aren't the number one thing on top of our mind when we've got huge business decisions and huge family responsibilities. And Sarah has been really transparent as an entrepreneur about their journey in exploring their leave and their pay discrepancies and how to fix that. They have been open as a leader of while Sarah is still raising investments, navigating the organization through COVID, has still kept her eye on the ball of how can she make sure that her company is still a leader in supply chain variety and diversity, and then also at home in her own offices looking at salary discrepancies and how do they have a pay leveling policy. And I think that's just one example of many of where what happens when you have a woman founder at the front, where she has created incredible partnerships with brands like an organization I used to work with, She Should Run, to women's sports franchises like the New York Liberty, but also is in taking care of the workers in her own team and looking at the supply chain that she is working with global partners. I mean, the ripple effects there are huge. And what would happen if not just Sarah, but to your point, Eleanor, all the women listening here are truly working within ecosystems and pipelines where they are fully supported, where the narrative doesn't just pat them on the head, but the narrative says, no, 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 you are a key linchpin here in terms of pushing our economy forward, expanding the pie. I mean, the possibilities are endless. I mean, this is where I actually it is not naive hope. This is a dedicated commitment to understanding what can be unlocked when you invest in women in business.
Well, it's interesting that in many ways we can already see that women are already taking decisive action around this. So, this idea of the broken rung, we often see it as, which it is, that, hey, when we look at traditional corporate structures and the labor economics of traditional corporate structures, and labor economics is, of course, can be incredibly gendered in terms of the types of expectations that
Mm.
are that women have, and the realities of our life, that is often seen as corporate entities are broken. And of course, there's a part where it's like, hey, let's take a look at those workplaces and practices. I mean, they employ millions of people. But what's interesting to me about that is that women are voting with our labor. This doesn't work for me. This system does not work for me. And that's, of course, one of the things that we know is driving startups and, the rapid growth of women-led businesses. But to your point, how do we show examples of how women are leading differently? So we don't just go and recreate, the structures that we wanted to get away from in the first place. I'm curious, the applicant pool for the 2026 Win Challenge is closed. I know that there have been just a very rich body of applicants, of ideas, of initiatives, some that are brand new, some that have already been deployed. Tell us about, like, what early signs are you seeing from the data when you look at this applicant pool? What is emerging that is exciting or innovative to you?
First of all, what is really exciting when you have an open call like this, a nationwide grant competition, to see that the breadth of over 800 applications came from across the country. So you have rural states, rural communities, urban centers, suburban centers recommended or that have applied is just truly exciting to see that the innovation is coming from across many different backgrounds. I'll just claim as a Midwest gal who now lives in the East Coast, it's really exciting to see that and remember that there are innovators across big towns to small communities. So to have seen that representation was really important to us. We did a lot of concerted outreach. Second fold, it's really exciting to see, we had these three different pillars: workplace culture and practices, AI, narrative change. We roughly saw about a third of our applicants come from each pillar. And right now, the innovations are coming from primarily existing organizations that are submitting proposals where they have a pilot, they have some type of proof of concept that's ready to scale. But a fifth of our applicants were actually brand new startup organizations, either maybe perhaps a new partnership between a university and a nonprofit, a brand new consortium of a lot of impact investors starting a nonprofit based on the type of research and work that they've been wanting to do. So I'd say that it's also really exciting to see a broad scale of the levels of innovation. You have a breadth of over 20% have a proof of concept, over 29% are ready to scale. So in the sense of where, when you're thinking about grant making, change making, you want to be able to move fast and intentionally, and to see the fact that we're going to be able to name these awardees in the fall and really move funds into organizations that are ready to get to work now, day one, to be able to innovate and to scale day one is really quite exciting, and then to have such a broad and varied pool. And then when it comes to the barriers that they're facing, we're seeing that it's about half and half between what I call those old persistent barriers and the new challenges. So the leading barriers and kind of problem equations that the applicants are looking at are caregiving and the broken run. So first of all, with caregiving, a lot of the applicants are submitting their proposals. It's from a lot of different perspectives. How do you increase access to caregiving? How do you empower more caregivers? How do you either infuse caregiving more into the workplace? How do you actually look at more caregiving options outside of typical work hours? I mean, it just truly is a wide variety, but it's steeped in this understanding that 1 in 4 American women go back to work within 2 weeks.
As a Canadian, we are like thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, I mean, right? It's just this
It's
sense of
yes.
after I had two emergency C-sections. I just wrote about this for LinkedIn. Two emergency C-sections. To imagine having to get up and go to work, it's just that isn't actually supporting families. And to understand what can happen when you're supporting families and you're supporting women, again, what the possibilities are there. Looking at understanding how women are, pivotal and research on women are 2 times more likely to give up their roles as opposed to men when you're thinking about the cost they're caregiving. So just really excited to see that there are so many innovators ready and willing and have done the hard work of putting together the pilots and are now ready just to be resourced and scaled is quite exciting. And then to the broken run, there are quite a few organizations that are looking at that first promotion rate. We know how important it is to have women founders and C-suites. And there are in this, it seems like there was a gap to be filled about how to support women in their first promotion rates, how to support women entering the workplace for the first time, how to support women through the AI economy, knowing that that first promotion is so key towards wealth building, financial security, your own individual long-term, right? The micro level, your individual rate of how you'll progress through your career, but also the macro trends of the first initial promotion rates are what are building the pipeline towards the C-suite, right? So this is just an incredible area that a lot of applicants are focused on. And then when it comes to the AI economy, it's looking at access to AI tools. How can we make sure that there are tools that are particularly this lens of built for us, by us? What are the tools that are going to help support? A lot of them are supporting caregivers, supporting women in fields that are predominantly going to be disrupted by AI. So whether it's an admin, customer service, finance, some in legal, but there's also quite a bit of women programs looking at how to prepare women in the trades for the AI boom. And then there's also this look at how to mitigate bias. There's a lot of great technical pieces coming in. This is where I'm going to nerd out a little bit, and hopefully the audience can nerd
It's
out with
very
me.
welcome. Exactly.
Yes, at looking at how can you, in the sense of what's the next level of media literacy of how you're training folks to be able to understand how to use AI for harm or how to use it for good.
Mm.
And then there's also a level of strategies at looking at understanding that it's not as simple as just going through an accreditation and poof, you're prepared for this massive transformation, that there actually has to be this whole ecosystem of support enabling women to be able to pivot, right? And the
Mm.
Washington Post came out, I think it was in March, with studies around how 87% of the roles that will be disrupted are roles that are predominantly held by women. And having grown up in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, seeing my dad and others go through globalization of our manufacturing sector, it is not simply enough to just give a few trainings and say, poof, now you're ready to transition into a new career. You really have to take folks on a journey and have wraparound support services and have access to good jobs. So it's just really, I would say, it's a map into what is possible if we get this moment right. If we really look at the AI boom in the face and recognize that this has incredible opportunities and it has incredible challenges ahead to make sure that there are huge swaths of our population that are not going to be left behind. And then what are the possibilities of, again, expanding the pie if folks aren't left behind? And then what happens if they are? And so I want to thank all of the proposals that have come in because they really are this map, this wayfinder into what is possible if we look at how the upcoming workforce transformation can be designed with women in mind. And I can't help but thinking I'll just say one more thing, Elder, as we're reading through the applications, as our different evaluation phases are progressing, we can just take ourselves back to the Gilded Age, where that was in the midst of the Industrial Revolution. There were these titans of industry that still have their names at a lot of our different buildings who shaped society for truly centuries to come. And this is a moment where in the AI economy, where everyday women to women founders to women business leaders, whether it's you're shaping AI governance policies, whether you yourself are taking ownership of this moment, whether you are Daniela Modi at Anthropic, there is this moment where women are really poised to be the titans of this time period if we can claim the moment. I don't say that lightly. I don't say that naively. I say it as almost a necessity. And it's just giving a lot of hope to see that there are so many folks from across different corners of the country who are claiming this moment.
Mm. What makes you say that, given when we look at who is leading, the CEOs and founders behind some of the biggest AI organizations, they are men. What gives you that hope?
It's the fact of, we have folks like on our WIN Council who are women leaders at the senior level, like Lori Martinez, who's at McKesson, who's helping lead AI governance across the healthcare industry. It's a lot of the women who maybe their names aren't every day in our New York Times articles, but they are doing the hard work every day. They're in the meetings every other day, looking at how are you building governance policies that are looking at the ethical questions, but also looking at the incredible questions around what AI can unlock for the workforce. And these are the people, these are the women that I want in the room where it happens, who are making these decisions, who are grappling with the trade-offs. I'll say that also when you're reading 800 applications of folks who are already looking at, and these are from nonprofits, right, who don't have the same level of resources as maybe a Fortune 500 company, but they are still looking at how can we use AI as a tool that's better serving our members, our community? How do we help it make sure that we could scale to new regions, to new sectors? Okay, if coming this as a nonprofit exec who's run a couple of different organizations, the fact that if they can figure it out, primarily also nonprofits are primarily led by women, I know that others can too, right? So it's this, I'm trying to, what I'm
Yeah,
trying to
so what
say
I'm
is,
hearing you say is like it's
yeah,
really about the democratization of
correct.
AI, the
Yes.
equitable rollout of AI, the equitable access, and thoughtful
Yes.
governance. And that's
Yes.
where women have that opportunity to shape it. Whereas traditionally, we've often looked at these titans of industry which is not the same as being a titan of AI. We don't have to repeat the golden age or the gilded age necessarily.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. And thank you for so well said. It's the democratization. It's the human centered approach, right? And if you could think about, we're for a decent amount of years now, we've been looking at how women thrive with EQ skills. Okay, this is our moment to be able to own those skills and to be able to make sure those skills are shaping the policy, the product
Yeah.
changes that are happening right now.
The other thing that strikes me as you're talking about what's emerging, who are the innovators who are shaping the world of work for women in the future? It is telling to me that so many of these solutions have to do with caregiving. And it's interesting. I can remember, talking to a very smart guy who was talking about, business growth. And it was very much like, you need to hire out all of your life stuff. Just hire it out, hire it out. And what was so interesting is the women were all like, actually, there's some nuances there. I don't know, you know what I mean? If when I have to think about kids drop, there's a lot of complexity around travel. So I would actually prefer to book my travel myself. What it's revealing to me is about the lives of women, about the things that shape our labor economics. And we know that care is one of the primary things driving women's labor economics. And so it's really cool that so many of the solutions have to do with it. And it makes me reflect on the women inside our SAFI ecosystem. So we know that a very small percentage of women-led businesses do over $250,000 a year in revenue. So it's a very small percentage, I think less than 5%. And that is who we tend to work with. And what's very interesting when we look at our data, we see that the majority of those women are primary breadwinners in their families, which means that very often the labor, the care is shared or is led by their partners. And so that just kind of reminded me of how it's very difficult to talk about economic advancement for women without this massive lever, potentially as important as things like education. I'd be very interested to look at the research, but I wonder if that lever care is as big of a lever as things like education in terms of determining women's economic outcomes. Maybe not that big, but it's a significant one.
I think if you talk to most women, particularly no matter what role they have, even if it's the role of mom staying at home, being the CEO of her house, yes, care is the driver, particularly as you look at how millennials are aging, boomers are aging. So we're more and more having women moving into the sandwich generation of where they're caring for parents, particularly as longevity is becoming a reality of, right? I have a 96-year-old grandmother and my mother in her 70s. So there is this element of where we are, though, not prepared for this moment. My best analogy I have of it is that it feels like with the care infrastructure, the fact that there's quite a bit of organizations that are looking at within our applicant pool that are looking at how do you even change the narrative around care and to stop putting it as a niche market and actually understand it as key infrastructure.
Mm,
But my best analogy is that we're essentially running a 21st century economy on 19th century plumbing.
yeah.
The sense of when you really look at what our modern cities, our modern businesses could not operate on plumbing infrastructure from 1899, but yet very much of our school systems and our care systems have not evolved to meet this moment. It's, Eleanor, to use your frames, from my perspective, a market failure. It is a perspective of a narrative failure to not understand that most people are going to actually also need to be cared for during at some point in their career as well, whether man or woman. And so there's multiple elements of where this could unlock. I will also say that as you look at, it's not perfect, but in terms of an evolution of where men have changed their roles of how they see themselves, not just as breadwinner, but as a partner, as a dad, as a wanting to be engaged in family life. This is evolving too for millennials and Gen Z men. And so there's an element of of wondering and being open to what it unlocks for women, but also what does it unlock for men? Getting back to the sense of cutting through the zero-sum assumptions and actually understanding that there are so many solutions that have multiplier effects if we just give them a chance.
As we wrap up, I want to touch on quite a practical initiative that's sort of running underneath everything that we're talking about. So the theme underneath what we've been talking about is that you were able to attract a wealth of innovative ideas from diverse thinkers, innovators, and organizations across every part of the United States, rural, urban, city, suburbs, all of it. And that to me says something, it speaks to the know-how of how does one roll out an initiative, right? And so we know that that ability to reach and to roll things out, that's a huge part in terms of diversity of opinion and just sort of equity generally. But what have you learned as in this process of penetrating the United States, getting the word out to be able to bring in, this kind of response? What have you learned about how you roll out an idea?
First, I do have to say it's humbling when you have solutions coming from Maine to Arkansas to Wyoming to Oregon to LA to Washington, D.C. to New York. To never underestimate Americans' ability for ingenuity. There is this sense of we have put incredible innovations out there into the world. There's a sense of where we need there is a
It's
moment of
almost unfair. It's almost unfair. Like when it's just, you're
it's
so right. You're
it,
so right.
let's lean into this. Let's
Yeah.
lean into this moment of where we have incredible history of innovation. So just it's humbling to see this. Number one. In terms of the lessons learned, I'd say that it's so important for us to be able to embrace a spirit of experimentation and to put resources and funds behind it,
Mm.
right? There's an element of where really being able to leverage a $60 million pool to be motivating folks to step up into this moment. Maybe they've had an idea or they've also had a pilot that they're now ready to scale. The importance is we have to put resources, right? And
Yeah.
just speak plainly, the ability to be able to put your money where your mouth is, right?
Mm.
And so much so, I think then the call to action for others is doesn't need to be a $60 million fund. What are other incentives to be able
Mhm.
to draw out the innovations from folks that are just, again, they're waiting to be called upon. They're waiting to be able to have their moment, but it needs to be incentivized.
And one thing that I have observed, which I think is unique and telling, because I think this is really good situational awareness and knowledge for people. Lots of people are trying to get their ideas out there in certain ways. What I've observed is it's having a team, but it's also paying attention to what conversations are already happening and who are leading or facilitating conversations that are central to the work that we're doing. And how do we start the work of building relationships with them? And I know that is time in the saddle from you and your team. But I think that, and it's so ironic, in the age of AI could be helping with that, of course, with identification, all of that. But in the age of AI, it is still these relationships that matter.
Great point again. The fact that it's a team effort across the Aspen Institute, across our partners and vendors that we worked with Pivotal. And it's both leveraging the relationships, but then widening the network, right? So there's always it's the balance of going out to the organizations that are doing the great work, who've been doing the great work for decades maybe, but then also asking them, who else are you seeing rising up through the states and the communities that you're working through, and to push your bounds beyond your comfort network as well. So I think that's what also I'm really proud of for our team is that we've pushed ourselves to make sure that we are as expansive as possible, and to see then that a lot of unexpected organizations and new to us, but they've been doing great work in their communities for a long time. So it's that balance between, yes, relationship driven and making sure that you're expanding your network.
So, in conclusion, we know that evaluation is currently underway. The winners will be announced in the fall, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah, what's next with the WIN Challenge, and where can people go to learn more about this work?
Please stay engaged at winchallenge.org. We'll be having announcements of, the Aspen Institute runs incredible convenings. We're going to be running convenings starting in 2026 in the later half of this year into 2027, where we want to uplift with key decision makers the solutions of our awardees, but also we're going to have a database of all the applicants. What are the key barriers they're focusing on? What's the other side of that equation? What's the solution that they're proposing? Be able to have this applicant pool have access to wide swaths of other funders or investors. And so if you want to stay tuned for the solutions, go to winchallenge.org. If you want to look at what the Aspen Institute is going to be doing for our convenes around the Win Challenge themes into 2027, please stay engaged. If you want to partner with us, please let us know. If you're all the entrepreneurs out there, if you're inspired, if you're thinking through, what are maybe some policies that I could potentially try to pilot and within my own company, please reach out. We'll also be releasing a series of reports and insights from our applicant pool, as well as our evaluation panel and our judges. So just a lot more to come. And this is an ongoing conversation. And I'd say, please join this momentum, this moment. Really, really proud of the community we're building so far. And like I said, we're trying to expand that network too.
Thank you so much, Clare.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the episode. If you found value in what I shared, please go ahead and like this video, give it a thumbs up, and leave me a review or leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next week.